Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, How to Stay Dangerous Goods Compliant and Optimize Parcel Shipping in the Brave New Omnichannel Shipping World. We have a lot of great information for you during this time. If you have any questions along the way, simply send them along in the question box on your screen, and we will have one of our experts answer them at the end. We will also be sending out a link to an on-demand version of this webinar in the coming days, so you can revisit any of the information as time allows. So let's start today by introducing our speakers. Next slide. My name is Amanda Armendariz, and I am the editor of Parcel Media. We pride ourselves on being the leading industry resource for parcel shippers. And in this role as editor, which I've had for almost a decade now, my focus is really on driving and creating the editorial content that shippers need to be successful and competitive in this ever-changing industry. Our next speaker is Brian Beets, and he is the Manager of Regulatory Affairs and Corporate Responsibility at LabelMaster. As you can see, he has over 20 years of experience in the hazard communication, environmental, and health and safety sectors, and he has extensive training on regulations pertaining to the safe and secure transportation of dangerous goods, both domestically and internationally. Now, the next slide is about Mike Graves, who did contribute a lot to this presentation. Unfortunately, he is ill today, so Scott Moore from PureBridge will be stepping in, but Mike did help shape a lot of this content of the presentation. So I still want to give a shout out to Mike, even if he couldn't be here with us today. So before I jump into what you're going to learn today, I want to spend some time just sharing the major trends and high-level challenges that we at Parcel Magazine are seeing as we try to navigate this brave new omni-channel shipping world. All right, next slide. So as you can see right here, there are four main things that we will be discussing today, and it kind of encompasses what a lot of shippers are trying to tackle as they try to stay competitive and relevant to their customers in this brave new omni-channel shipping world. You want to, of course, meet customer demands for free and fast shipping. You, of course, want to avoid inventory outages. You want to get closer to the customer, and you want to meet the needs of decentralized shipping. So compliance, packing for profits, and carrier and rate selection. And what does all that mean? Well, we're seeing a lot of major trends that a lot of shippers are adopting, obviously not everyone, but one of the biggest things is point number one, the importance of meeting customer demands for free and fast shipping. You know, years ago, people had no problem paying for shipping or even waiting, weeks for shipments to arrive. I remember being a kid, the Sears catalog would come, we'd pick out our stuff, and, it was no problem waiting 2, 3, 4 weeks for the stuff to get to us. That was just expected, and it was no problem to pay, maybe $7.95 for every $100 worth of goods you ordered. That was just an expectation. That was completely fine. Now, that would just be completely unheard of. There's this expectation, obviously, that shipping is very, very fast. 2 days is often the absolute maximum that people are willing to wait. A lot of them want it next day, or even if they live in a large metro area, same day. And same thing, they expect it to be free. Amazon has created this perception that shipping is free. Now, obviously, we know it's not truly free. If you are a Prime member, you pay a set fee, right, per year. And then, yes, your shipping is quote unquote free, but you're still paying for it. And even if, you're not Amazon, which obviously most of us are not, someone has to pay for the shipping. So whether that's something that shippers want to add in the cost to the product's price, or do they offer free shipping over a certain threshold? That way, yes, the company is paying for the shipping, but hopefully the markup on their goods is worth it enough so that the free shipping, makes the customer happy, but still makes you profitable in the end. Or even some shippers, really focus on some intangible benefit that promotes customer loyalty, maybe some sort of excellent customer service, which of course we should all be doing, but, or offering, free returns. So even if they pay for shipping, if the returns are free, there's all these ways to really, address these concerns of fast and free shipping. And then in terms of avoiding inventory outages, there are several things that shippers are doing, like shipping to store is now popular, where the good just goes straight to the store, and then people can come get it. And that way, if, the product is out in the distribution center, maybe the store itself has the good. And so then there's not this delay time. Or same thing if you're actually shipping from the store, which is a popular omni-channel method that some shippers are implementing. You know, it's a good way to utilize extra space in a store, almost as a mini distribution center, and it's a good way to circumvent those inventory outages too. If a distribution center is out of a product, but the system shows that there are, 3 stores within 50 miles of a customer that have the product, the customer can still get the order on time, customer satisfaction is maintained, no harm, no foul. So getting closer to the customer is kind of that along the same lines, ship to store, ship from store, maybe things like alternative delivery locations like parcel lockers. Those can always be a way to, it allows the customer to have more of a say in their delivery experience. They don't feel like they need to be home, obviously, for a delivery to get there. They have more control over when they will pick it up. And then finally, like I mentioned before, there's the need for decentralized shipping. So a system that really allows optimal carrier and rate selection, so that you're not sending something, overnight when 2-day would be completely fine with the customer, and then you're spending money that you don't actually need to spend. So those are just kind of some of the trends that we here at Parcel are seeing. Obviously, I can't go into them in too much detail, otherwise we would probably be here all afternoon. But those are kind of just some of the high-level trends that we're seeing, and I think we're going to go into those a bit more in the presentation today. So next slide, please. All right, so what you're going to learn today, as you can see, there's a lot going on in today's omnichannel shipping world. So during the next 45 minutes or so, Brian and Scott will show you some of the best ways to stay DG compliant even while you are integrating an omnichannel shipping environment and delivering from an endless aisle to keep customers happy while cutting time and your costs at the same time. And additionally, like we kind of touched on a little bit on the previous slide, we'll be taking a look at how packing for profits can control waste and reduce unexpected DIM fees. So up first is going to be Brian from Label Master to talk about achieving effortless hazmat compliance. But before I hand it over to him, I just want to say how great it is to see these 2 industry-leading technology providers come together to solve critical business problems. Label Master provides the dangerous goods handling expertise and technical know-how, while PureBridge knows parcel shipping and provides an enterprise parcel TMS platform. So together, I think this partnership is a really great foundation to educate you all today on dangerous goods compliance. So with that, I will hand it over to Brian.
Good afternoon, everyone. So the first thing that I'm going to touch on is just briefly talk about what exactly are dangerous goods. So everyone comes in contact daily with an item that in some way is considered hazardous in transport. The infographic on the right gives some good examples of things that we commonly come in contact that we wouldn't necessarily think about as maybe being hazardous in transportation until you're in charge of shipping them. So companies who ship cell phones, laptops, power banks, things of this nature, even if they're not selling them, they're just shipping them to another business location. They're hazmat in transportation because of the lithium batteries they contain. Things like bug sprays, aerosols are dangerous goods in transportation because of the compressed gases. Another example we hear about a lot, used automotive parts. Companies don't think about that, but the residual petroleum products that can be in those parts, once you go to ship those, now they're considered hazardous in transportation. And all these items have exceptions within the regulations that change the requirements depending on the quantity, but you have to be well-versed and fully understand the regulations to ensure that you're properly shipping them and staying in compliance. Next slide, please. So hazmat, it can be a headache, but it's not just a headache. It can cost your company a lot of money if it's handled incorrectly. So if you ship hazmat, you know it's complicated and can be a headache, but it's the complexity that can add up costs that you might not have considered. So if shipments are out of compliance, they can be rejected by carriers. This can cause extensive delays. And then you might be subject to additional costs, such as some pretty hefty fines. So if your shipment's stopped and you're cited with a violation and a fine, that can add up to be thousands of dollars per occurrence can add up pretty quickly. And if you process your dangerous goods shipments manually, that's a pretty slow process, and it can really limit your ability to process large volumes of shipments in a single day. So really, key to eliminate headaches, reduce your costs. You should be really looking for a way to ensure that your shipments are in compliance with the regulations and reduce the manual processes to allow you to increase your potential volume. Next slide. Regulations, there's a lot of them, and they're constantly changing. So this lists a lot of the major regulations. You have the complexity of the carrier variations. Carriers like UPS and FedEx have their own additional variations and exceptions that add to the complexity. And as I said, they're constantly changing. The United Nations just recently released their latest changes to the model regulations, so we're going to start to see those trickle down into each of the modes of transportation. And for the most part, things are fairly well harmonized, but depending on the mode and the area of the world that you're in, the regulations are still different and very complex and hard to follow unless you're very familiar or you have a system in place to keep you in compliance. Just as an example alone, the 49 CFR, the hazmat regulations in the United States, that book's over 1,200 pages. So if you have to rely on manually navigating those regulations, it's a lot of work. If your shipments contain large quantities and you've got multiple shipments, it can get messy really, really quickly, especially if you've got multiple modes of transportation involved in that shipping process. And the challenges can multiply considerably when you're shipping from multiple locations. So you're shipping from different distribution centers around the country, warehouses, stores. All of those locations have to be capable of shipping from each of those points and staying in compliance with the regulations. Next slide, please. So some of the keys to staying in compliance and efficient with your DG shipments, first and foremost, you've got to know your products. And everyone in your organization that handles the shipments has to be familiar with and know the products. So they've got to be understand the product information, the classification, understand and have access to the safety data sheet for the product. So the safety data sheet is what provides all of the hazards for the product and also outlines the transportation information. So Section 14 of the safety data sheet is really key for transport requirements. It's going to spell out the UN number, proper shipping name, packing group, things of this nature, which are all required when you're navigating the transport regulations. Training, continuous training. The regulations require that everyone who plays a part in shipping hazmat be trained. There's initial training requirements, depending on the mode of transportation, recurrent training requirements, and you want to make sure that you've got backups for those positions. So you have key personnel who go on vacation, leave your organization. You want to make sure that you have people in place as a backup who are fully trained and can step in and keep things moving and don't add in delays for you. And lastly, a key is an automated system. So something that's repeatable, reliable, keeps you in compliance, and reduces the chances for variation and increases your potential to increase your volume. So, and with that, I would like to hand over a presentation to Scott Moore at Peerbridge, and he can elaborate more on the repeatable and reliable solution and ways to optimize your parcel shipping in the face of omni-channel delivery challenges.
Thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. I'm going to talk to you two parts. The first one is going to be on a few ways to solve the omni-channel puzzle, how to ship from anywhere to anywhere. I'll also cover a little bit on cartonization as the second part. But let's just narrow in on the omni-channel puzzle first. I think Amanda put it very eloquently at the beginning. That main driver behind the shift to an omni-channel shipping strategy is changing consumer expectations. I'll cover a few stats in the next slide, but what they want is they want free and fast shipping, and they also want options. So we'll dig into that. But before I do, just wanted to introduce and define two key concepts that we're going to explore, and PureBridge is really incorporating into their thinking right now. The first one is the endless aisle. This is a strategy that extends your inventory downwards to your stores, laterally to other distribution centers and warehouses, and even upwards to your suppliers and manufacturers. And the purpose of this is twofold. One, as much as possible, you try to extend your coverage and moving your inventory as close to the customers as possible. Secondly, you're creating what we call this endless aisle. So if inventory is out in a certain location, you can always turn to another place, and often there'll be even some advantages that they could be closer to the customer, so you'd be reducing your cost. And the whole purpose there is to never experience a stock out. The second one is the local delivery. This is a strategy that uses new and non-traditional local carriers for same or next day, personalized white glove or over-the-threshold delivery. It means that carriers like bike messengers, couriers, the gig economy, and even LTL for larger packages are all in play now, and that can improve the customer experience and in fact get things quicker to where they need to go. Next slide, please. Thank you, John. So it's really hard to build on what an expert in the field, Amanda, would say about this, but a couple of stats that I think are pretty important. The first one is, how large and smaller e-commerce players are changing customer expectations. So what was once a nice to have is now becoming a have to have in order to compete. This stat is pretty crazy to me. 99% of U.S. consumers say fast delivery is important to them when making online purchases. I mean, that's basically everyone, so you might as well say 100%. Now that is up. That expectation is growing. 43% of U.S. consumers expect companies to have much faster delivery than the previous year, and that same stat was 35% 2 years ago. So it just keeps growing and growing. The other changing customer expectation or habit or behavior is that today's shoppers are no longer afraid of ordering high-end, more complex products online, like luxury goods, furniture, and more. If you look at furniture and home furnishings, that's the fastest growing segment of e-commerce right now. Something that you would expect most people would have purchased in store. Now it is expected to account for over $50 billion of e-commerce sales this year, and that's a growth rate of 18% over 2018. Now, it's furniture, home furnishings. We know that consumers were very apt to order laptops, phones, things like that, but nowadays people are ordering e-bikes, scooters. All those things have batteries, and I think they would be classified as dangerous goods, so they have to be part of your thinking on how best to address those. Might also include some other dangerous goods classified items like that contain compressed gas or aerosols. So there is that element there that's pretty critical in order to ensure that you're maintaining compliance in and from wherever you ship items. So from the store, from distribution center, and even from the suppliers. So this is also increased the need for shippers to be able to offer white glove installation and haul-away services and more. Now, that's whether the customer is a mile away or across the ocean. So to meet these demands, retailers, e-commerce 3PLs, and more have expanded their carrier networks, utilizing international, regional, and local carriers to deliver on these expectations. This is not a new thing, but consumers are definitely staying home and increasingly shop online. The role of retail storefronts has changed. I heard people talk about retailers having a retail problem. Also heard a lot of people talk about it's not really a retail problem, it's a real estate problem. They've oversaturated the market with retail locations, and in those retail locations, they've locked in a lot of their inventory into the stores, and if people aren't coming by and they're not getting the foot traffic, that inventory is not going anywhere. So some of the traditional retailers are doing in face of this real estate problem to better utilize their brick and mortar footprint. They're now converting those retail locations into showrooms and distribution centers. Amanda touched on this at the beginning. On the e-commerce side, I think the customers of large online stores were using the brick and mortar locations as showrooms. So they might go there, they want to touch and feel, they want to see different models, and then later on they may once they made a purchasing decision, they would go ahead and buy that online. I think a lot of online retailers were initially unwilling to embrace this, but they now started to, and you're starting to see some of the bigger ones build out an in-person footprint or a brick and mortar footprint to accommodate this. So that means that consumers can come in, they can take a look, and when they're ready to buy, they would buy either right then, and could be an online purchase maybe that gets delivered, or they would order it later online. It's kind of a convergence of the physical and the digital, and the same is true in reverse. So brick and mortar retailers are expanding into e-commerce, and online retailers are building out showrooms. As distribution centers, retail locations allow the retailers to ship, in a lot of cases, much quicker. So often same day, if you have that inventory in a store that's close to a customer, the purchase is made and it can be picked up that day and delivered right away. You can also use it as a ship-to location, and often if someone just wants to pick it up in the store, the inventory is there. No shipping is involved at all, and this can help you cut cost on your purchases made online. Picking up in store is, as I just mentioned, it is one of those things that you can do in this strategy, and I think that you'll find that when someone has to go in and pick up something in a store, they end up purchasing other things. If you think about it, you might order a phone online, you end up in the store to pick it up, and then you're going to grab the cases and the car chargers, which are a little bit more personalized. And incidentally, those are typically also have a higher margin. So you're getting, I used to call that point of sale sales. So somebody's at the counter, they would pick something else on top of what they were there to get. Next slide, please. Another way today's e-commerce and traditional retailers are incorporating an omni-channel strategy is by directly accessing supplier inventory via a ship from supplier program or drop ship program. They expand their network of drop ship suppliers and manufacturers. They can offer more products and more SKUs without taking on the costs and liabilities that come with increasing their own inventory levels. It's another example of the endless aisle of inventory. So this gives the retailers' customers more choices and more options in getting the product they want when they want it. This will meet the demand for fast, including same day, particularly if that supplier is right close to where the customer is ordering, and free delivery, and that's at a lower cost to the retailer. Not to mention the fact that they don't have to impede cash flow by having inventory levels on hand. It's in essence leapfrogging that intermediary supply chain step. An out of stock item in the store or warehouse, it can't be delivered, period, let alone free or fast. And it certainly can't be taken home from the store. So whether someone is online or in person, people just won't make those purchases. This is another good way to never experience a stock out. You can offer products from the endless aisle that includes your suppliers and your distributors. And when and if a customer cannot purchase or that you don't have that inventory on hand, chances are they're going to turn to a competitor to get what they want when they want it. So you stand a chance to lose that customer forever. Next slide. In the end, we tend to believe that all delivery is local delivery. And even though the national carriers can take products the last mile right to the consumer's doors, there are an ever-increasing number of regional and local carrier options that are out there that can provide timeliness and service options that can meet the growing demands of consumers. And often that can be done at a lower cost. I think it's important to remember that moment a customer receives their package, that moment is the last brand touch point you will have with, the retailer will have with that customer for that purchase. So you want that experience to be as memorable as possible. Local delivery carriers provide the same services as national and regional carriers, and the choices are plenty. There's over 500,000 courier and delivery services companies worldwide. This allows shippers to offer the local touch, whether that customer is across the street or across the ocean. Talked earlier about bike messengers, couriers, the gig economy, and LTL, that they're all in play. And again, this gives shippers a little bit more choice of carrier and consumers more options for delivery. These choices would include the ability for same or next day, personalized, white glove, or over-the-threshold delivery. And that could include setup or haul-away services, all very desirable from a customer perspective, and in fact, improving the overall customer experience. So while managing this ever-expanding web of carriers, this is a complex thing to do. Those retail and e-tail companies that do will not only keep customers happy, but they'll save time and money. An omnichannel approach enables shippers to save money and time on deliveries while not sacrificing the services that their customers have come to expect. And whether a customer is local or ordering from across the country, having an omnichannel multi-carrier strategy allows customers more opportunities to get their deliveries where, when, and how they want them. This kind of service boosts customer satisfaction along with repeat and referral business, adding to a business's top line. What was once a real estate liability can be turned into a real estate competitive advantage by efficiently using retail square footage as a showroom or a distribution center What does that mean to a shipper, to a brand? It means increased profitability and increased customer loyalty, all great things. So we'll turn now to what we're calling Pack for Success. I think if we were to take a poll of the audience, I wouldn't be surprised if almost everyone listening in today has experienced a ridiculous packaging fail. So you're probably familiar with that. It's like a huge empty box. There's one small product inside. There's lots of extra filler. Essentially, it's shipping air. The truth is, me as a customer, I don't like to see that. I know it's wasteful. I know it's unnecessary. I know it's in many ways uncaring. And customers are not a big fan of receiving air, and carriers hate shipping it as well. What we're really talking about is poor packaging, those carton decisions that are made in warehouses and in an omnichannel environment, in the stores or at a supplier. that result in too big a package with lots of empty space or too many small packages for the same order. And those would all represent extra cost and sometimes dimensional weight fees or surprise dim fees on your bill. Not to mention that negative experience when your customer opens a big box with a small product inside. Just one, I'm pretty sure everybody knows what a dim dimensional fees are, but these are, we call them air taxes that carriers charge to compensate for poor packaging decisions when a package is large relative to its weight. It's calculated by taking the length times the width times the height of a box and dividing by a dim factor or divisor. The lower the dim factor, the greater the dim weight will be. And carriers will use the greater of the actual weight versus the dim weight to charge for that parcel. The trends for this is increasing. Currently, the dim factor for the major carriers is 139. Prior to 2011, it was around 194. And over the years, that dim factor has decreased. So the scope of the packages that are charged at their dim weight is increasing. And it's always important to remember that lower is not good in this case. The lower the dim factor, the more you will pay as a shipper. Looking at some of the challenges here, carriers hate shipping air. Talked about that a little bit earlier. I think the reason is their assets, their trucks, their trailers, their airplanes, they're like hotels. They want to maximize the use of their space because for them, space equals money. And as e-commerce has driven parcel shipping volumes at an increasing pace, the demand is outpacing capacity. So carriers have been scrambling to deliver all the packages they are receiving. And this did boil to a head a few years ago. The CEO of a major carrier emphasized this problem during an open investor meeting about how poorly packed some of the packages were and how light they were in relation to their size, and how it contributed to them not being able to deliver all their shipments in time during the holiday season. And other carriers had a similar reaction or similar problem. Their response was by saying, if we're going to deliver air, then we're at least going to get paid for it. So they immediately started expanding their dim weight formulas. They took into account the empty space and passed along the cost to the shippers who, either ate those costs or passed them along to the consumers. And it was to their advantage. And that year they made about $100 million more in dim fees over the previous year. So it wasn't a bad decision on their part. Let's look at some of the other problems associated with poor packing. Waste. It's bad for the environment and it adds unnecessary cost. When you leave extra space in a box, you've got to fill it with something. So that's excessive packaging. That's the negative part on the environment, and it's always extra cost. Plus, you're paying for bigger boxes, or you're paying for more boxes when you could have shipped in a fewer number, and all that, it costs extra money. Another problem associated with is putting a small order in a big box, even with some of that stuffing around it, that order is going to move around and that can lead to damage and returns. If you pack goods in too big a box, the items are more likely to rattle around and be damaged. And damaged products lead to returns and unhappy customers. I think too, this is, you have to be careful when you are shipping damaged or dangerous goods here too. You have to be careful with box size. That could present some problems if that was a hazmat item bouncing around in that box. It puts shippers at a cost disadvantage, particularly if you're in e-commerce. And Amanda talked about the world's largest e-commerce company earlier and the impact that they're having. They accounted for nearly 50% of U.S. e-commerce sales and most of the e-commerce growth. Shipping represents 10% of their costs versus the average SMB, where it accounts for more than 30%. So they've been able to get a lot leaner on shipping, and they've driven that expectation for not paying for shipping. And it's hard to compete with someone who is really looking at shipping as a loss leader. And they lose to the tune of billions of dollars every year on shipping, and they're comfortable eating those costs. Talked a little bit about customers hating receiving air, and I probably don't have to dig too much in it. Everybody's realizes that when you get that big carton with a small item, you know it's wasteful. You have to deal with all that packaging materials, and it just doesn't look good for your brand. So now let's get into some cost-effective packaging tips. Here's some ways that you can improve this. Order entry, purchasing, and shopping carts. You need to know how many cartons an order will require in order to estimate parcel shipping costs accurately. Right now, most estimates are based on guesswork. If you guess too high, you lose the customer or the sale. If you guess too low, you lose margins. Pack poorly and incur waste, plus unexpected dimensional fees. Most guesses are based on the shipping themselves. So let's look at ways you can offset and limit these costs to your brand and your bottom line. And we've compiled 4 tips that you can use. First one, it's pretty obvious. Avoid using cartons that are too large. But you have to have the controls in place where people are shipping. If you think about it in an omnichannel situation, it's very easy to control this in a warehouse or a distribution center. You just expand the number of box sizes, and you put in rules and processes to make sure that people are maximizing and choosing the right carton there. But if you start to look at an omnichannel world where it's that carton may be packed in a storefront, it might be packed at a supplier, you can start to see how quickly that can get out of control. Avoid using too many cartons. So we typically think of this as an overcompensation. If you're going to get dimmed, you might as well use as many small cartons as you can. So in other words, you're packing individual items in individual cartons that are all part of the same order. And the problem with that is that there's always a minimum charge for each box. So you can end up paying more if you follow that straight. You're not going to get dimmed, but where it's going to cost you money is on the individual minimum charges. Third tip, it's really 2 tips in one. You can look at using alternate carrier services. So we mentioned earlier that the 2 major carriers have a dim factor or divisor of 139. Many regional carriers have dim divisors that are higher, so better for you. There's some out there with 166. Some don't even have a dim divisor at all. There's some gig economy players out there that just charge per trip, for example. It doesn't matter how many boxes or the size of the box. So that could be an option. There's a national carrier out there that has no dim divisor for up to zone 4, and the dim divisor from zone 5 to 7 is 194. So there is some play here. As long as you have relationships with those carriers, you can make better choices in terms of the dim factor itself. The other part here is negotiating a more favorable dim factor. And we do understand that this is something that is on the table to talking to some of our consultant partners. So you can include that in your negotiation strategy. The 4th tip is using cartonization technology. And there's, PeerBridge has this in our platform, and it's available in other areas to maximize your cost-effective packing. One of the things we've learned over the years is that warehouse management systems and order management systems, they don't take transportation costs into account when they're putting together a pick list or packing instructions. What they take into account is labor, the steps to where the items are in inventory, and so on. But it doesn't account for that shipping cost. And I think that's surprising because we know that that's a significant part of cost of goods. If you remember earlier, if you're most e-commerce or retailers, the cost is 30% of the cost of goods sold. And that's just growing, and the rate that it's growing is at twice the rate of inflation. So it's just getting worse. So the cost difference between packing good and packing great can be pretty significant. If you think of cartonization technology in the same way that you would think about the video game Tetris or any other video game for that matter, the math that goes into those games is pretty impressive. They're algorithm based and they're designed to manipulate objects in virtual space. And that's really what cartonization does. It's like a video game where instead of cars or random blocks in a virtual 3D world, it looks at product packages in a carton and uses their dimensions and other rules and instructions to fit them into the space as best as possible. Those algorithms, in a matter of seconds, will find the most transportation cost-effective method of packing. And those algorithms can include other rules. So pack with or don't pack with, you can imagine if, I don't know how realistic this would be in a world, but you never know, a bowling ball with a bunch of light bulbs. So those two items should never be packed together. That's kind of an extreme example, but I think it makes the point. Same would be true of dangerous goods. Some things, they just should not be packed together in the same carton and shipped at the same time. So people need to know that. It's, in a warehouse situation, you might have a specialized employee that makes those decisions. But when you start spreading and decentralizing that across your omni-channel delivery strategy, you can lose sight of that. And there's other rules that you can follow there too. How the technology works, it has an understanding of all the products available in a given order, along with each product's physical dimensions and weights. It understands the inventory of cartons you have to ship, and it takes that into consideration and gives you how best to pack that order. It will also look at the carrier's dim factors, what's available, and it will make strong recommendations on, if you want to pack that 3 things in one carton or pack them into a series of cartons. It will calculate that all and will give that detailed instructions as part of the pick list for the warehouse, or in an omni-channel environment, the storefront or the supplier to pack. In a way, it's a win-win-win. The customer wins because they don't get that big empty box with nothing inside of it or a small thing inside of it. The merchant or shipper wins because they're getting the most cost-effective shipping transportation. And the carrier wins because they're able to cube out their trucks. So just a quick summary of the benefits. If you're quoting too high, the customer may abandon the sale. And in the e-commerce world, that is really shopping cart abandonment, but you'd see that in other areas too. And if you quote too low, you're going to lose money. Your margins are going to be eroded because you're going to get hit by a dim fee at some point. So it's really important to generate accurate quotes so your customers know what to expect, and that should be done as early as possible in the order process. You're going to reduce shipping costs. You're going to reduce packaging costs. I mean, it's pretty straightforward. If you don't have to use as much fill, or you use smaller box instead of a big box, or you reduce the number of boxes, that's all reduced cost. And that extra packaging correlates with reducing waste, or reducing that extra packaging correlates with reducing waste. You can improve customer satisfaction when they aren't receiving the big boxes with the small items inside. And lastly, you can reduce the amount of damage that you have. So that's it for me today. Thanks, Brian, for helping and sharing your knowledge. Also, big thanks to Amanda for joining us and providing some of the insights that I think only she and Parcel Magazine can provide. So back over to you, Amanda.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here today. It's always fun doing these types of webinars. I like discussing, the trends that we're seeing. So again, there's like a summary on your screen right now. So the four main things that shippers need to be cognizant of is, first of all, you have to exceed customer demands. You have to meet the challenges of omni-channel shipping in terms of, they want it free, they want it fast, they want to have options like Scott mentioned. Two, you have to stay compliant. You obviously don't want shipping delays or penalties or fines. You need to efficiently handle the dangerous goods compliance for anywhere that the items are packed and shipped. And third, obviously, if you want to keep customers, it is absolutely crucial that you deliver results. And one way of doing this is through the local delivery options, from the endless aisle, which will save you time and money, and it will boost customer satisfaction. And then finally, you want to pack for profits by reducing, the shipping waste and the returns cost, and just overall improving the customer experience. So those are the four main things you want to keep in mind. Thank you very much to everyone for attending and listening to our presentation. And now I have a few questions from our attendees, so I'll just dive into them. And Scott, Brian, whichever one of you wants to jump in and answer them, feel free. So the first question is, can you discuss customer returns and the requirement to have customers ship hazardous materials back to you?
Brian, do you want to answer that, or do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, so from consumer return, there's exceptions. There's reverse logistics regulations that are specific, for that. So the regulations allow for some exceptions to make it easier for consumer returns back to a manufacturer or a store.
Okay, great, thank you. The next question is, and I think this is for Scott, but either one of you can answer. What transportation modes does your solution cover?
Maybe we can both answer it, but from a peer-bridge perspective, we cover a lot of different modes, from LTL, less than truckload, right down to the gig economy and the carriers. We would also integrate with all of the large national carriers, and we also integrate with U.S. Post Office.
Yeah, and all the sorry, I was just going to touch on, so international air, ICAO, IATA is covered, 49 CFR, highway, rail, vessel, IMDG, ocean, European ground, so pretty much all the major regulations for all modes of transportation are covered.
Wonderful. Sounds good. Thank you. The next question is, does your solution generate the required forms for dangerous goods shipments?
Yes, it does.
All right. Thank you. Let's see. The next question is, if it's a new product for my company, how do I know if it's classified as a dangerous good?
That's going to be, you're going to want to reference the safety data sheet for the product, which the manufacturer is required to supply, and that's going to outline if there's any requirements in transportation related to DG.
All right, sounds good. Scott, did you have anything to add?
I have nothing to add. Looks like there's no more questions from the audience. I think we can say thank you and goodbye to everyone.
All right, great. Well, thank you everyone for attending. I appreciate you all taking time out of your busy day to be here. Thank you to both Scott and Brian for a wonderful presentation. And just a reminder that you will be receiving a link to the on-demand webinar, so you can view it again in the future if you would like. So thank you, everyone.